"Old man, show us how clueless you are," the SEAL recruit mocked, shoving his rifle into the janitor's hands to humiliate him. But the old man caught it smooth, checked it in seconds, and stood like a man reborn. The room froze. Minutes later, black SUVs screeched in. The Admiral stormed through the bay, walked straight to the janitor, and saluted. "Sergeant Ward," he said, "you wrote the tactics they all train with." The recruit who mocked him was sent back to week 1. The janitor, he was the legend none of them saw coming. Before the sun rose over the SEAL training base, the place was already busy. Young soldiers moved fast, checking gear and getting ready for the day. But in a quiet corner of the equipment room, one man worked alone. He wasn't loud. He didn't bark orders. He just moved slowly and quietly, doing chores that no one else wanted to do. His name was Elias Ward, an old man, maybe too old for a place like this. But he came every day, sweeping the floors, fixing broken gear racks, wiping down benches covered in dust and sweat. He didn't talk much. He just did the work, careful and calm, like it mattered. Like he had nothing to prove but still wanted to leave things better than he found them. But not everyone saw it that way. One of the loudest and most confident SEAL trainees, Petty Officer Riker, came in that morning like he owned the place. He had a habit of talking down to people, especially anyone he thought was weak or slow. When he saw Elias working near the weapons table, Riker snapped. "Move it, old man. You in the way," he shouted. Elias didn't fight back. He didn't even flinch. He just nodded, stepped to the side, and kept going. But Riker wasn't done. He wanted attention. He wanted the others to laugh. Why is some grandpa even allowed to touch SEAL equipment? What is this? Take your dad to work day. A few other trainees looked over. Some smiled, waiting to see a show. They expected the old man to stumble, to stutter, to shrink. But Elias didn't. He stayed quiet. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't try to fight. And that silence made Riker even more upset. He wasn't getting the reaction he wanted. He wanted to be the alpha, the loudest, the toughest, but Elias was making him feel small without saying a word. That's when Riker slammed his rifle onto the table, loud and angry, the sound echoing off the walls. "Hey," he said with a sneer, "try not to break this." He stood back, arms crossed, like he was daring Elias to touch it. At first, no one understood why he did that. Was it a joke? Was it a trap? The air got quiet. Everyone watched, but Elias just looked at the rifle. Slowly, with steady hands, he reached for it. He didn't seem scared. He didn't fumble. His fingers touched the weapon with care, like he'd held one before. Not like someone new to it, but like someone who knew every piece of it, every weight, every sound. And that changed everything. In that moment, something in the room shifted. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. The smirks faded. The laughter stopped. Riker's eyes narrowed. Because now, it didn't look like Elias was just an old man. It looked like maybe, just maybe, he had once been something more. Something no one expected. And suddenly, no one was so sure who held the real power in that room. Elias didn't blink, didn't rush, didn't even glance back at Riker's smug face. He just placed the rifle back on the table, gently, like it was something worth respecting. Then, without a word, he kept moving. The broom returned to his hand. The sweeping resumed, his steps slow but sure. But if you paid close attention, you'd notice things most people missed. The way he stepped lightly, not because of age, but with care. His left leg dragged just a little, a limp earned, not born. The way he never walked directly behind anyone, always giving space, always watching corners. The way his head would tilt slightly when someone raised their voice, as if listening for something beyond the words. Danger, tension, intent. His shirt, though simple and faded, had a rough square sewn inside near the ribs, barely visible, but stitched with a care that didn't match anything standard. A patch once torn from a uniform, maybe, now hidden close to the heart. From the far end of the bay, Master Chief Rogan watched. He'd seen all kinds of men walk through the SEAL compound, wannabes, heroes, ghosts in uniform. But Elias was something else. Rogan noticed how the old man didn't just clean. He moved like someone trained to clear rooms. His hands didn't fumble. His eyes didn't wander. When he scanned a space, it was the scan of someone who'd once had to choose the fastest way out, fastest way to survive. Rogan narrowed his eyes. This man wasn't here for a paycheck. Meanwhile, Riker wasn't done playing alpha. He stood tall near the gear wall, still full of himself, throwing out taunts meant to provoke. You just gonna mop floors the rest of your life. You know where you are. Old man, this ain't a nursing home. You think you belong here? Prove it. His voice echoed off the metal walls, but Elias didn't react. Not the way Riker wanted. Because some men don't need to prove anything to people who haven't seen what they've seen. And Rogan, still silent, began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. An old, familiar tension. The kind that comes right before something big breaks open. Something real. Because he'd seen that look before, in the mirror, after his own deployments. That quiet, heavy stillness of someone who had once carried too much, and was still carrying it, even now. Riker wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. So when Elias kept sweeping as if nothing had happened, it got under his skin. He walked up fast, stepping into the old man's space, blocking his path, arms crossed like a schoolyard bully. You got ID, Grandpa? You even supposed to be on base, he said, loud enough for the nearby trainees to hear. Some shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Elias met his stare without a word. That made it worse. Riker reached out and grabbed Elias's forearm, trying to shove him aside. But the moment his hand closed around the old man's sleeve, something unexpected happened. His fingers met solid muscle. Not the soft give of age, but a coiled, quiet strength that didn't match the wrinkles or gray hair. Riker flinched, but quickly masked it with a scoff. Hiding weights in your sleeves now. Still, Elias said nothing. He just pulled his arm back calmly and stepped around him like it didn't matter. That calm made Riker look foolish, and he knew it. His face flushed. He grabbed his rifle off the bench again, stepped forward, and shoved it into Elias's chest. Eh, he spat, louder now, trying to pull laugh from the silent room. Show us how little you know, old man. Elias caught the rifle. Not fumbled, caught. Hands firm, movement exact. And in that moment, everything changed. He adjusted his grip, checked the chamber with instinctual ease, scanned the room once, then stood taller. Not younger, but something sharper. Older in a different way, like a blade long hidden, suddenly drawn again. His shoulders squared, his stance locked in, his breathing slowed like a man slipping into something forgotten but natural. The bay fell quiet. Rogan saw it. From the far end, he caught the shift. Not just in posture, but in presence. Elias had gone still in a way that felt dangerous. Controlled. Like the room had just become too small for what was now inside it. The Master Chief didn't say a word. He simply turned, walked out the side door, and pulled out his phone. Not to report a problem, but to alert someone who needed to know. Someone whose number wasn't in most people's contact lists. And as the ringtone hummed in his ear, Rogan glanced back one last time through the window. Elias hadn't moved, but everything around him had. Elias hadn't moved. The rifle still rested steady in his hands, like it had always belonged there. His eyes remained calm, yet sharp, focused not on Riker, but on something beyond him, as if waiting for a signal no one else could hear. The air in the bay had gone thick. Trainees, once entertained by the scene, now stood in awkward silence. Even Riker, cocky moments ago, shifted on his feet, unsure what to say or do. The balance of power had shifted, not by force, not by noise, but by presence alone. Whatever Elias was, it was no longer a question of if he belonged. It was now a question of who he really was. And then the quiet cracked wide open. Outside the bay, engines roared, deep, heavy, official. Not background noise, not routine. Every head snapped toward the open windows where the sun was just beginning to cast long shadows across the compound. A convoy of sleek black SUVs surged into view, tires grinding against pavement, flanked by armed Marine escorts. Dust curled around the wheels as the vehicles came to a sudden stop. Behind them, The base commander sprinted after the convoy, clearly not the one who called them in. His uniform half-buttoned, radio clutched tight, face pale with confusion. Inside, no one moved. Elias remained still, his hands on the rifle, his breathing slow. Rogan, who had disappeared only moments before, now returned at the side of a towering figure in dress blues, Rear Admiral Hayes, commander of Naval Special Warfare. He wasn't here for ceremony. He wasn't here by accident. His boots struck the concrete floor like a judge's gavel, deliberate, final. Hayes didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the stunned young trainees frozen near the gear wall. He didn't even glance at Riker, who now looked pale beneath the flush of embarrassment creeping across his neck. The Admiral walked straight through the tension, straight through the questions hanging in the air, until he stood face to face with Elias. For a beat, no one breathed. Then, in full view of every man who had mocked, doubted, or questioned, the Rear Admiral stood at attention and raised his hand in a crisp, solemn salute. It wasn't forced. It wasn't political. It was real, and it shook the room. The kind of salute you give only to someone whose name deserved to be spoken in rooms full of stars and medals. To someone who had bled for others without asking for thanks. To someone whose silence wasn't weakness, but the result of having already lived through hell and walked out stronger. The room went still. Elias returned the salute without a word, his face unchanged. But in that tiny gesture, everything broke wide open. What had been a moment of mockery became one of awe. Riker took a step back, as if trying to disappear into the wall. And the rest of the trainees, now humbled, stood like statues, no longer asking if the old man belonged, but wondering how they'd missed it all along. The silence in the bay stretched long after the salute, every second pressing heavier than the last. The young men who had moments ago laughed and mocked now stood frozen, uncertain, humbled by something they didn't yet understand. Rear Admiral Hayes slowly lowered his hand, took a breath, and turned to face the room. His voice, when it came, was steady but full of weight, like a story too long kept quiet. Most of you don't know who this man is, he said, looking at each trainee as if demanding they truly see Elias for the first time. But the freedom you trained to protect was once held in place by the hands of men like him. He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. In 1972, deep in Southeast Asia, a six-man recon team was dropped behind enemy lines. Their job was to gather intel and move quietly. But they were discovered, surrounded, outnumbered 100-1. Most men would have broken. Most would have never made it out. But Sergeant First Class Elias Ward didn't break. He coordinated fire missions with a busted radio, held off wave after wave of enemy fighters, dragged his wounded teammates to cover under direct fire, and refused exfil until the last of them was safe. He walked out last, barely breathing, bleeding, holding the dog tags of the ones who didn't make it. A hush fell over the room like fog. The mission was classified, Hayes continued. Buried so deep most of the Pentagon forgot it ever happened. He was nominated for the Medal of Honor. It never came. Politics. Silence. He never spoke about it. Not once. He gestured toward the faded fabric tucked inside Elias's shirt. That patch. From the uniform he nearly died in. The limp. From shrapnel he never asked to have removed. You see an old man. What I see is a legend. Riker swayed slightly, the color drained from his face. Hey, step closer, voice low but sharp. You think you're tough? You think you know this life? You're standing in the presence of the man who wrote the playbook you think you've mastered. No one dared move. And in that moment, Elias Ward wasn't a janitor. He wasn't even a soldier. He was something larger, something sacred. A man who had carried the weight of wars in silence, and had never once asked to be thanked. Admiral Hayes didn't raise his voice, but his words left no room for argument. Petty Officer Riker, he said, gaze fixed and unblinking, you will now present your rifle to Sergeant Ward. Properly. The weight of the order dropped like an anchor. Riker's face went pale, hands twitching slightly as he stepped forward, rifle gripped tight in shaking fingers. He looked like a man being forced to hand over something sacred, not just a weapon, but his pride. Everyone watched. The silence sharpened. Riker extended the rifle with both hands, this time not as a mockery, but like an offering. Elias took it slowly, not out of frailty, but out of reverence, as if he respected the weapon more than the man who had just held it. His fingers curled around the grip, and then he moved. Fast, clean, in one breath. The rifle flipped up, charging handle pulled back, chamber checked, trigger reset, safety engaged, sight tested, shoulder posture locked. It was like watching lightning take form. Nothing wasted, no motion uncertain. Years peeled away from his frame, not by magic, but by muscle memory carved in fire. No one breathed. No one dared speak. He didn't look up. He simply handed the rifle back to Riker with the same calm he carried all morning and said, "Still works the same as it used to." The words echoed louder than any shout. The kind of sentence you don't forget. The kind that writes itself into memory. And with that, Elias Ward didn't just reclaim his honor. He reset the definition of it. The fallout came swiftly, but not cruelly. Riker wasn't thrown out. He was sent back to week one. No shortcuts. No ego, just a second chance, stripped of swagger and armed now with humility. He would have to rebuild from the ground up, every push-up, every mile, every lesson relearned under eyes that now expected more than muscle. They expected respect. In the days that followed, the SEAL training program quietly added something new to its curriculum. A required course called Foundations of Unconventional Warfare, the Ward Doctrine, taught by Master Chief Rogan himself. No textbook could teach what Elias had lived, but his methods, the way he moved, the choices he made, the courage buried beneath silence, would now shape every generation that came through those gates. And in the main hallway where instructors' portraits hung, one new frame joined the wall. A black and white photo of a young Elias Ward, eyes steady, uniform crisp, nameplate worn smooth by time. The next morning, Elias was back with a broom in hand, sweeping as calmly as ever. But the air had changed. Trainees passed him and nodded with quiet respect. No laughter, no mocking, just silence, the kind that comes with learning. Days later, in the mess hall, Riker approached slowly, head down, tray in hand. He stood awkwardly before the old man. "Sir," he said quietly, "would you tell me about the men you served with?" Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled out the chair beside him, patted it once, and said, "Sit down, son. Let me tell you what real warriors look like."